Here we go. So I wanted to welcome Angela tonight. So Angela and I work together at the Sports Center Atlantic, and Angela's been doing nutrition with our snowboard team here in Nova Scotia for I'm actually not sure how long it's been, but it's been a bunch of years. Yeah, for a while. Been really awesome. Our athletes have always loved what the information she's given, and we always really enjoy her sessions. Angela presented at our competition development course for snowboard, for Canada Snowboard, a couple years ago, and that was also really well received. So we had some feedback when I asked what you guys wanted as coaches for these webinars. We had some feedback that we wanted nutrition information. So obviously Angela came to mind first. So I'm just going to double check that no one has any questions because I do see one. No, perfect. So we'll get started, and then like I said, as we go through tonight, if you have questions, type them in the chat of the questions, and I'll be watching, and Angela will be watching as well, and we'll answer them, and we can unmute you if you need it. Enjoy. Take it away, Angela.
We'll take questions as we go. If we don't get too derailed, this session's for you. So I don't want to miss any burning questions that you may have. So I just have to say one thing. I am recording this from my home. We actually shouldn't say home. It's a condo. We're in between houses, and so I may have to jump at some point. I'm right beside my 5-year-old's bedroom. So so excuse me if I have to, but he's usually pretty sound sleeper. So welcome everybody, and thanks, Natasha, for the invite. We've done some work the last I guess a few months ago now. We did a session with some of the Canada Games level snowboarders, and we did a grocery store tour and some a food demo or recipe demos. So I like to be very practical in my approaches. So a lot of this we got a lot of feedback, which was great from Natasha for the outline. So I'll just kind of flip through to the outline. I don't think I need to go into detail about me, but I've been around for a while. I wear a few hats, and have been doing high performance sport for a few years, for almost 10 years now. So I'm really excited to be presenting on winter sport, because that's not something that we have a lot of athletes. Funny enough, in at our sports center, we're a lot of summer sport athletes. So I've yet to really get involved with any high performance snowboarders. So just based on what Natasha had sort of mentioned to me, from what you wanted to get out of this session, we'll talk a little bit about the nutrition demand.
Angela, I just lost your audio for a second. Are you there? Can you guys hear Angela or me? Yeah, you guys can hear me, not her. Okay. Whoa, thank you guys. You guys are fast. Angela,
I'm back.
yay, you're back. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I don't know if it's my computer or if it's a system. Usually I have no issues with connections, so hopefully it won't be an issue.
You could, if you wanted to, close your video. Sometimes that helps. Now
Close
that
my
we all know
video.
now that we all know what you look like.
Okay, so just go here. There.
That might help.
There. People can see you. Oh, you've hidden webcams. Okay, cool. So, all right, so let's continue.
Thank you.
Um, Yeah, hopefully that'll work. So we'll go through a little bit of nutrition demands for winter sport in general, and then I know you wanted sort of the comparison between nutrition for training versus competition, and I threw in there altitude because I think that is one important aspect of your training and competition that requires an additional demand in terms of nutrition. So we'll talk about that. And also travel, so adjusting not only nutrition but maybe sleep and some strategies for that. And then there was a comment too that Natasha had suggested, or that one of the coaches suggested, in terms of suggestions for plant or vegan diets. So and how that may implicate some other nutrient demands. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that as we actually go through. So some of the key elements that are unique, I think, to winter sports is, and in general, lots of athletes. I think that's one thing I've kind of learned is they're all healthy eaters. They all have great food choices. They just don't have enough of it, or they're not periodizing their overall nutrition appropriately based on their phases of training or their YTP. And I may throw out some acronyms, so if anyone doesn't know what they are, just raise your hand or ask the question. But so in that yearly training program, they're not adjusting appropriately even during that period, let alone when they're either going to training camps or competitions. So that's one sort of key element or strategy that I work with our athletes on. And I have them stay healthy. Again, they may eat healthy, but if they're not eating enough, and we'll look at what the risks are from not just getting enough overall in terms of energy and nutrients at the right times, and how that implicates their overall immune systems, and then health, and then obviously training and performance. And that's about preventing nutrient deficiencies, whether, again, they're either not adjusting appropriately, or maybe they're avoiding certain food groups like vegans, or if they're focusing more on plant-based foods. What are some risks involved in or some nutrient risks that might be at play? And I thought, obviously, kind of unique to your sport, they are mainly based on an anaerobic power or energy system, but as many athletes, and especially in something like your sport, looking at having lower body weight. So they may be consciously trying to maintain a low body weight, therefore just not, or limiting intake and limiting overall energy. And we'll look at in the next slide what that actually does. Sorry if when I'm not in PowerPoint mode, it's coming up all my windows on top of each other. So basically what this slide is really showing is, when I'm in a group of face-to-face with other coaches or athletes, I always ask up front, so what are some of the symptoms of energy deficits, particularly in sport? And one of the first things one of the participants always says is fatigue, early time to fatigue, and that's true, but it's not the only one. And if we're dealing with strictly females, maybe it's irregular menstruation, maybe it's full-blown amenorrhea, so 3 months or more without a period. But we see energy deficits and risks of energy deficiency in other, not just females, and also a slew of other risks that or symptoms that can happen from a mere 300 calorie deficit based on what their estimated energy requirements are for that certain period. So just wanted to spend a couple minutes on this. So yes, fatigue. We also see decreased coordination. Obviously, skill-based sport like snowboard would be detrimental to performance. Decreased concentration, impaired judgment, just poor ability to adapt to training protocols. So if you're constantly loading and loading and loading an athlete and not getting adaptations from those training bouts, it could be that there's not supporting their overall training bouts appropriately. And in the next few slides, we'll look at exactly what amounts of energy, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats that an athlete would need in your sport, depending on the training versus competition. So, increased risk of injury. So, if they're constantly getting recurring nagging injuries, that could be a red flag. Decreased endurance performance, decreased muscle strength, obviously, and decreased glycogen stores leading to fatigue and depression. So if you find your athletes are moody, more moody than normal, it could be, again, another indication that they just may not be getting enough. Sorry, that bottom bubble is supposed to say GI issues, so gastrointestinal issues. A lot of athletes will blame it on certain foods, and likewise, they might be part of the culprit, but sometimes it's just, again, they don't have that good gut balance in terms of pH and probiotics and prebiotics and just energy to support that. Sleep difficulties, and we know how that can affect training. So energy deficits also affect sleep. And so the newer term that we're sort of seeing in the research is not just that female athlete triad. And I think there may be a few coaches on the line that might have alluded to that or spoke about that in our last session a couple of years ago. But it's kind of taken a bit of a turn. Not that the female athlete triad still exists, but we're looking at a much broader concept in terms of energy deficiencies in sport. So if you're looking at any of these bubbles and thinking, yeah, I can see, one or two or three or more of these risks in some of my athletes, then you might want to approach your sport dietitian and see if they can work with them. Probably they are low in terms of overall ice and energy. So for training, sort of nutrition for general training for snowboarders, we look at sort of what some of the challenges are. So just looking at the effects of cold and versus the effects of altitude, we're seeing an actual increase in estimated energy requirements, and that's due to excess shivering, thermoregulation of 10 to 15%. So right off the bat, any sport compared to a warm weather sport, we would see an increase in terms of estimated energy requirements, training versus training, because they're training in the cold. They have an increased reliance on blood glucose or muscle glycogen, which then, of course, has an increased demand for carbohydrates. So just where they're trying to maybe control body weight or keep their body weight low for their sport, obviously they may be having a low carbohydrate right off the get-go. So, but not understanding that they have this increased demand in terms of just being able to compete and train in the cold. There's actually an increase in fluid loss at colder temperatures as well. So again, they may not feel the need to drink, and we'll talk about hydration in a few minutes. Effects of altitude. So we have some hormonal changes that actually happen as we go to altitude, which can have an increase in ventilation or vasorestriction, and blood and vascular pressure as well. We may see weight loss, and that just could be because they have lower appetites at altitude, colder environments, and that sort of contradicts that they actually have a higher estimated energy requirement because of training in the cold. So now they're at a double whammy because they're actually losing lots of appetites, preventing them from probably eating enough, and that increased 10 to 15% is just another additional amount that they would need. So the meeting those requirements become quite difficult, and I'm sure you can relate to that. We'll talk about iron in a little bit, but they do have obviously an increased need for iron stores as and iron requirements as they go to altitude as well. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Energy requirements. So again, I hate throwing out numbers like this because everybody's so individual. So you'll see pluses, and it is based on again really what they're doing when they are training, whether it's getting ready for a competition and they may be tapering a little bit, or whether at camp or at altitude or just general training environments. Those calories or those total daily energy intakes should be quite different. And I had one athlete, one of our Olympic athletes actually say to me a few years ago, well, Angela, I just know that when I'm hungry, I just know I need to eat more. So is that right? And I said, yeah, that is right. That's great that you're in tune with that. But however, we want to prevent that hunger. So if they're already hungry, they're probably already not getting that full effect or adaptation from their training because they aren't fueling properly at that point. So we want to build that up and hopefully recognize that before the hunger actually happens. And if they're ignoring the hunger or they just don't feel like eating or have access to food, then that's again another triple whammy there. So just to show carbohydrates versus protein, or carbohydrates and protein at both sort of types of phases of training and competing, you can see it's quite different. And again, it is based on a gram per kilogram basis per day. So we'll look at that in a second. Protein usually can stay the same. We'll talk about protein and the quality of the protein, the timing of the protein is really what's really important. But overall, daily amounts of protein doesn't shift a whole lot. What shifts mainly is that carbohydrate and then some other nutrients that we'll talk about. So I've sort of developed my own what I call food guide or power fuel food guide, and this is what I would teach to our athletes in terms of being able to manipulate. So just to flip back for a sec, manipulate those numbers. I don't want any athlete or coach counting calories and carbs and protein. I would rather them do this and feel confident that the plan that we give in terms of servings of foods by the food groups based on again what period of training they're in or competition would relate back to those exact pre-described numbers that we would estimate for them. So that's just more for your information to see the differences in terms of how they compare in those different types of training and competition environments, and then how it would translate into a more easily sort of manageable day-to-day sort of consumption. So and I'll spend usually a few minutes talking about this with our athletes. Because a lot of them at first get-go will say, especially if they're adolescent athletes, oh, well, I'm definitely not hitting the vegetables and fruits. If I'm trying to maintain or control weight, maybe grains and starches are a no-no in their world, so they're limiting those. But they usually do fairly well, again, depending if they're vegan or they're eliminating dairy. But usually proteins coming from the milk alternatives or meat alternatives are pretty well, their intakes are pretty good. Fat
Angela, I think we just lost your. Yeah, gone again. Yeah, thanks, guys. There you are. Angela, we just lost you
yeah.
for a sec when you were talking about meat and alternatives, and then you said fats and oils, and we lost you.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, oh, so yeah, so the extras are things like anything that's added to, so if they're having cookies or jams, and extras like sports drinks would fit into that as well. So usually they're pretty good in the bottom half of that table. It's usually the top two groups that I find are limiting. So. And those are where we get the majority of our carbohydrates from, so our fruits, starchy vegetables, grains, and our dairy. So if those are limiting in any way, then that's probably the source. If there is a deficit in energy intakes, that's probably where it's coming from, and likewise the carbohydrates. So it's just a matter of shifting some of those servings and then teaching them exactly what a serving is. So once they get that sort of understood, then they go back to this and they say, well, yeah, you know what, maybe I am not that bad off considering, half a cup of Cheerios, bad example, half a cup of Vector is a serving of grains and starches, half a cup of fruit, a serving of fruit. Yeah, then those numbers might not look so daunting after a while. But then we actually break that out in terms of meal planning, really based on day parts and in and around their training. So those numbers, again, don't become as daunting when we look at maybe it's just 2 servings of grains, breakfast, pre-training, post-training, 2 grain, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see how that kind of adds up. But I just like to show there should be a shift or a periodization, and they should be able to manually, not manually, but practically, I guess, adjust those servings, knowing what training phases that they're in or that they're going into, that they can add or take away a serving or 2 of those groups. Does that make sense? I'm going to speed through because I do want to get to some of
Yeah, it sounds good,
the good.
Angela. There's no questions yet.
Okay, good. So we developed as part of the Canadian sport dietitians across Canada, developed our own sort of plates that I find are really useful with athletes. So if there's anything that you take away from this, they're not published yet. This is sort of our first draft, but you're welcome to use and share with your athletes. I find it's a great practical tool for them to be able to see how can I adjust based on if I'm doing sort of moderate training, whether I'm in a going to training camp, or even maybe now in competition where again I might need less overall, but still focused on a balanced in terms of nutrients. So just using the plates and on the right side the servings. Adjusting the servings in terms of their training loads can be really, really useful. So feel free to copy those slides if you want and use them as handouts. I find the athletes kind of relate to those really well. So talking about fluid, I say it's the unforgotten or the forgotten nutrient because we always think in terms of carbs and protein, fats and energy, but we tend to kind of negate fluid. But there is a significant performance detriment in terms of, and it really depends on the sport, but where we see sort of even a decrease in performance, it's usually in the sports that are those more skill-based sports. So for example, endurance, cyclists or runners can probably go at a higher fluid deficit without seeing a significant decrease in performance versus maybe a snowboarder, for example, who has a little bit more coordination and concentration involved in that sport or team-based sports. So really, it should be we should be doing a very good job of monitoring fluid, whether it's intakes, and I always get the question, well, what's the right amount? And we don't know. It's very individual, especially when you get into those colder environments. Looking at even temperatures, humidities, getting some data on our athletes, I think is key. And that's something that I try to do with some of our groups of athletes, is just start gathering some weight data pre-post training sessions. If there's fluid lost, how much fluid was taken in during, and it's really just a strict equation in terms of calculating what their actual fluid rates or their sweat rates are per hour, and being able to adjust that based on the temperature and environment that they're training in. So, it could be, we've seen losses even in cold environments of 1 to 2 liters of or kilos, which equates to liters of fluid an hour. So really important to monitor, and I don't know how most coaches do monitor that. It gets really difficult when they're probably not wanting to drink because they've got all their gear on and they don't want to have to pee. I get it. But one of the easiest ways, I think, to monitor daily training and fluid requirements or fluid needs is through just looking at their overall color of their urine. So that's a good kind of another scale that if you want to print and give out to your athletes, is a great sort of check-in. There's also other things that we would do as part of a sports science team, and that's a little bit more detailed, but we take urine-specific gravity. So we actually test the concentration of the urine, and that would be literally telling us whether if it's more concentrated, at what level they are dehydrated. So those are some of those numbers that you would see on the bottom there. Sorry, those are the actual weight loss and the volume to drink. But we would actually do urine specific gravity tests. But if anything, tell your athletes day to day. If they're not on a multivitamin supplement, then they can easily do a urine check. Color should be nice, straw colored, about 2 to 3 would be well hydrated. Anything over than that, they're looking at probably dehydration. And I always tell them it takes up to 36. Depending on the level of dehydration, up to 36, sometimes 48 hours to become rehydrated. So if they're already dehydrated and they're going and training again the next day or again that day, they're further dehydrating each training bout they do if they don't get themselves back up to sort of an equal hydration or euhydration status before they train again. So it's just a snowball effect. So really important. Again, not sure what you coaches do in terms of practical hydration assessments or protocols, but again, it's hard. I know nobody wants to drink frozen slushy sports drinks in a cold environment, but maybe having and I don't know, it would be nice to hear from some of the coaches what some of the athletes are doing. Are they doing broths? Are they doing warm thermoses of decaf, maybe teas or coffees? What's sort of the go-to for fluids? And I'm thinking in training.
So you guys can just type on in either the question or the chat if you have anyone that wants to respond. Water and Gatorade, one of the coaches says, Angela.
Okay. Good.
Yep. I know, Angela,
Awesome.
mine pretty much stick to the same thing, water or Gatorade.
Okay. Okay. So the cold, the freezing doesn't bother them. So that's good. Okay. Excellent. So yeah, so a really quick and easy thing to do is next training camp you're in or next training session that they're in, and if weight's an issue, I always sort of get them to maybe go on the scale backwards, jot down their weight pre, and then their when they're done, their weight post. Obviously minimal clothing if they can, and jot down how much fluid just to kind of keep track if they've got 500 bottles of Gatorade or whatever it is, just to keep track of how much they've actually taken in, because that would actually account for fluid lost as well, because they actually took it in. So that's factored into the equation. If they still have a loss of over 1 or 2% of their body weight, then that has been shown, and again, everybody's individual, but how that can affect their overall performance. So
And
not
Angela,
something to be overlooked.
Oh, sorry, we had a
Yeah.
couple other coaches weigh in. So, one coach said that they use a product called Vega, which is an all natural Gatorade type drink.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
one said jugs of water and orange juice, and another said sometimes they go in mid practice for hot chocolate.
Oh, good. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, they're all great choices. So juice, the Vega product, I'm not sure which one it is. I think there's an they call accelerator or a pre-drink, and then a more lower carbohydrate. So depending on the level or the time of their in training would depend on whether that beverage would need carbohydrates or not. So but for fluid, all great fluid choices, good electrolytes. So good mixes there. So if we're looking at kind of prepping for travel, again, something else we've got to look at adjusting those overall carbs, calories, and protein. We'll talk about iron specifically, and maybe some other supplements that we might want um, to look at. Maybe getting some anthros done before camps or before travel. When I say anthros, anthropometrics or body composition assessments, so that we know what if they are losing, gaining, what's happening during camp. So a baseline would be great to have before. And then we'll look at what travel foods or maybe kitchen supplies and equipment that would be good for travel, or making sure they've got in their tickle trunk. So what I call my travel pack, and that's literally an example of one of my athletes' travel packs in flight. So if they're flying, we'll look at some acceptable options in flight. So in transit, I always say if it's plane, they're again making sure they're well hydrated before, and there are some guidelines there, making sure they're not dehydrating by excess caffeine or alcohol, hopefully prior to. Um, then we're looking at eating small, easily digested meals. With some good carbs, protein, which will help maybe them sleep before, and maybe sleep on in flight as well. And then if you're looking at maybe ordering special meals in flight, you can do that pre. And I always say, don't bank on it, bring your own. So, what sorts of things would be good? Um, Obviously, anything that can get through security, or you can get on the other side past security. Pitas, wraps travel really well. Juices or sport beverages obviously wouldn't be able to get through security, but post, fresh fruits, again, depending on where you're going, may not be able to travel with those. But dried fruits tend to travel okay. And if they declare them, I always find that depending on the country, they're okay. Um, Homemade muffins, fruit squishies. If you don't know what those are, it's basically baby food in a little pouch pack. Pouches are seeming to be the trend right now, but I really like fruit squishies. They're kind of the new all-natural athlete gel, I call them. When I do grocery store tours, I take athletes down the baby food aisle, and they have a much better selection of different combinations of squishies, or I call fruit, veg, and grain sometimes in there. So those are excellent fuel replacers, even in between training bouts or runs as well, that they could utilize, but good for travel. Resealable top. Meal replacements, obviously, your breakfast essential type things, Boost, Ensure, Oasis NutriSolutions also is a great 100% fruit based, with vitamins and minerals to it. So that's a good meal replacement that they can pack. Or again, if they're going through security, they wouldn't be able to. But I actually had one of our Rio athletes had about
Angela, we just lost you. We heard one of our Rio Olympics, or Rio Olympians. Sorry, guys, we'll just wait a sec. She keeps. Oh, Angela, I see you trying to talk, but I can't. We can't hear you. That's strange. Try again, Angela. I'm showing good network quality. Angela, do you want to try just again?
I'm back.
There you are. That's so strange. I am so sorry. I have no idea why it's doing that. So we lost you at one of our Rio Olympians.
Oh yeah. I have a picture of her. Three of her suitcases were food and tools and equipment, and one was personal. So sometimes we do have to, unfortunately, maybe pack some of our go-to foods. I always say don't try anything new. So if you've got your, your trusted and tried foods, make sure that you're bringing those with you. Um, Sandwiches, again, vegetable sticks, obviously, cereal bars, protein bars, pack really well, dry cereal. Trail mixes are great, again, depending on which country you're going into. You might not be able to take nuts or seeds, but, and then obviously yogurt or milk if you're getting them across the security. Let me see if I can. No, I'm not. Okay, there we go. Other things that travel well, oatmeal packs are great. The instant oatmeal, the natural 100% oatmeal, skim milk powder if they're looking at increasing their protein, dried fruits, fruit leathers, again, the baby food squishies, beef or turkey jerky, tuna packs also travel well. Um, and some honeys or jams would be good too. Again, they've got that increased carbohydrate requirement. So any dried forms of crackers, pitas, things like that, and fruits that we can get extra carbohydrates in would be great. If we're looking at sort of adjusting, we do spend some time with our athletes in terms of how to adjust if they're crossing time zones of like 2 or more hours. They should be strategically adjusting their wake up times and bed times depending on how many hours difference their destination is in terms of clock time. So giving themselves enough time, obviously, when they get there, they usually say 1 hour per day. So if they're traveling 4 hour time difference at their destination, then they should give themselves 4 days for an actual adjustment. And that's sometimes not not practical, especially for athletes in school and things. So looking at maximizing sleep, preparing as much as they can in advance and adjusting those or initiating those sleep and wake cycles and phasing that in. Sometimes we will consider the use of melatonin if they're interested in doing that. There is a strategic protocol for that, a couple days before and a couple days in at destination. So if you're questioning that, I would just recommend you chat with your sport dietitian or sport dietitian on that to help them manage that. Other sort of strategies we have adjusting to the time zone before they get there on their watch, obviously eye shades, earplugs, some saline, maybe nasal spray, and that's for hydration and maybe reduced infection promoting immunity on flight. Again, sleep according to the destination schedule. You can be active when they're not actually sleeping, and drink during their flights. So Some strategies as they arrive. Again, the most light exposure and adjusting the eating are two really effective tools. Again, the old sleep protocols of no no blue screens or even the yellow screens now of the phones and computers before bed. Carbs, again, good carb protein, complex low GI, maybe carb, more of a casein type of protein source before bed would actually help them induce a nice sleep. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, just talking about, again, adjusting to time zones. We actually have, again, a protocol for use for melatonin, light, and then maybe even adjusting some caffeine intake if they are used to using caffeine to help adjust their wake cycles when they actually arrive. So if we're looking at adjusting their overall, again, going back to that sort of meal planning guide, there's sort of the difference in terms of servings of what we'd be looking at based on actual competition. So their energy requirements may be significantly lower, and that, again, depends on exactly what they're doing before their actual event days. But there would be a significant reduction in terms of overall carbs, protein, and energy. So if we're looking at carbs, there is a specific gram. I'm going to just do a little bit of a review here because I'm not sure how many of the coaches in the audience have had this information before, but we do have a usage of carbohydrates based on body weight. So there are a very specific number of carbohydrate requirement based on what that athlete weighs and what maybe their weight goals are and what they're doing. So it could be a big shift from, anywhere between 300 and maybe 500 grams of carbohydrates a day, depending on whether they're in that more moderate intense type of, or moderate versus intense type of training and what they're doing. So again, being able to adjust that. Protein, I think, is something that always is very well done with our athletes. Tends to be the nutrient of all athletes of choice. They know that it's important, which is great, obviously, for rebuilding and repairing. We don't actually get a whole lot of energy, or we use the energy from protein as well, unless there is insufficient carbohydrate present, and that's when the protein starts to try to be used for energy. Muscles start to break down. You might not be seeing those muscle protein or the muscle adaptations that you're hoping to see in some of your strength training programs with your athletes. So again, maybe take a look at overall calories and carbs. But just to show you the difference between requirements for an adolescent athlete versus an adult athlete, again, depends on what they're doing, but in more of your sport, we'd be looking at an adult athlete, snowboarder, getting between 1.6 to 1.7 grams per protein a day, and that actually equals about 80 to 140 grams of protein a day. Vegans, we're looking at a little bit of a higher amount, and that is strictly because the proteins tend to be more limited in a vegan diet. Not that they can't get it, they absolutely can. We just find, based on diet histories, that they're just not getting sometimes the quality of the protein enough overall. So there's a little bit of additional requirement there. Again, not usually an issue. We're usually seeing intakes of protein with athletes over on average 2.2 to 2.3 grams per kilo body weight per day. So they're usually getting enough. What we're not seeing is they're not getting enough of the right amounts distributed throughout the day. So typically they're getting a little bit, maybe breakfast through to mid-afternoon, and then by supper, that's when they're getting that 20 to 30 grams in a meal. So we can kind of focus on maybe just paying a bit more attention to how much protein is in each of their actual meals or snacks, then they would be actually maximizing their overall muscle protein synthesis better than having bolus or a backlog, I always say, of protein at the end of the day. So just, again, look at maybe when you're in camps and you see snacks, just question, they're having an apple or they're having a banana, great choice, no protein though. So combining some of those foods to make balanced carb protein options will help them meet their overall, but again, have it more distributed throughout the day. Yes, there's difference in quality of proteins for sure. We have obviously the kingpin right now of all protein is showing in the research is dairy. And so if we've got athletes that are avoiding dairy, not to say they can't get it in other ways, but we are seeing sort of whey being the top, and then we've got some egg and soy as being the next sort of top two if it wasn't if they can't consume whey. So some of our protein choices are listed there. I won't go through all of those, but you can kind of see the balance of carb protein and what sort of our best choices are. So if we look at vegan proteins, yes, obviously we can still get some good, some great protein. The only difference is when we talk about proteins and amino acids, some of our meat or animal proteins are more balanced in terms of their amino acid profiles. So when you hear about quality of proteins, vegan protein tends to lack a complete or all those essential amino acid profiles. So if we looked at soy, for example, that's actually the only vegan complete protein that exists. So if they can do soy and they like soy products, that would probably be the best bang for their buck in terms of an overall vegan protein. Obviously, with other types of plant proteins in there as well, grains and starches have some protein. But soy would probably be their top quality choice in terms of a vegan or plant-based protein. We didn't talk about fats, and I always like to just sort of mention that it is an important nutrient still in an athlete's diet, and again, depending on what their needs are, could average anywhere between 1 to 2 grams per kilo of body weight. So they kind of look at me and say, well, even though I'm trying to maybe maintain or get down to a certain weight, yes, it still is important for fat-soluble vitamins and obviously other physiological processes, and so we need to make sure we're getting those. They tend to get them in foods, but when we look at the added fats per day, back to that sort of slide on the servings of food, it's really important that they still get 1 to 2, depending on the training, 3 even servings of added fats a day. So whether that's through margarines, dressings, butter, even seeds like flax and hemp and chia can be considered an added fat. Even avocado would be an added fat, or other oils, etc. So talk about altitude for a couple minutes. There is a significant demand on nutrition when we look at athletes going to altitude. Iron is one. Looking at improving immune function before they actually go. So optimizing their immune system or health before they actually get to altitude. So maybe that's initiating some probiotics or foods with natural probiotics. Sometimes there's not enough in them, but we'll look at that in a second. Again, overall adjusting their carbs and protein to allow for those increases in hemoglobin mass. So really what we want to do is bump up their iron, and we'll chat about that in a second. Prevent illness, promote adaptations to the intensity of the training, increase their intake, and then obviously preventing injury during camp. So how do we do that? Let's maximize what they're doing on the hill and in between their training bouts. So again, whether that's gels, sports foods, and I'm again not sure what most of your athletes are using now. Protein bars.
Did I think we may have lost you again, Angela? Can anyone hear her?
I'm back.
There you are.
I'm glad it doesn't take long to come back.
Yeah, it's all good.
I'm not sure where you lost me. I keep talking and then I realize,
No, I think we just lost you when you went to change the slide.
oh, okay, cool. So I was just saying, I'm not sure what your athletes are using sort of during training, during like long training bouts. Most of what I see, either again dried fruit, sports bars, they tend to get pretty hard if it's a really cold, cold environment. Energy balls, that picture is there. But I'd be interested to hear what some of them are doing. Again, if we can get the fluid with our protein type of snack in between, it would be great. So I'll spend a second just talking about recovery. Some one area that I always see athletes, and again, not sure what your level of athletes are, but it's something that all athletes should be doing immediately after their training. So just something to maybe keep an eye on or monitor. If they're not, if they're waiting till they get home, again, they're sort of delaying that recovery process. So, and it really depends on what they're doing. So it could be, anywhere between 50 to 70 to 100 grams of carbohydrate, and a difference of between 10 or 15 grams of protein, upwards of even 30. They're actually saying in the research 30 to 35 grams of protein in that immediate recovery snack. Now, again, depending on the intensity of that activity bout. Needless to say, they should be doing a carb protein about 3 or 4 grams of carb to 1 gram protein ratio. So again, if they're having a banana, they're having even 1 cup of chocolate milk, and that's been well promoted in the media lately, which is great, but it's not enough. They need to have at least two cups of chocolate or white milk. They could have. Just so happens chocolate has extra sugar, so it's extra carbs. But they could have two cups of white milk, 2 cups of chocolate milk, and then an added piece of fruit to that to get the carbs up. So other options, again, convenience-wise, some protein bars. Again, I always challenge my athletes to look at the label and make sure that they're actually getting that 3 or 4 carb to protein, 3 or 4 carbs to 1 protein ratio. And most of them are a little shy on the carbs. So having some juice, like some of you had said, or some carbohydrate beverage with that would help bring that up and top up their fluids. So I spoke about that. And again, types of protein. So again, whey tends to be the fastest acting. So that's what we're looking at in terms of if they can have a protein bar or a protein, if they are over 18 and using protein powders, it's a whey protein isolate. And the reason for that is one of the amino acids, leucine, is sort of the trigger for the onset of that protein synthesis. So just so happens leucine tends to be highest in whey. So again, a little bit more difficult if they're not consuming dairy or they are vegan, then I would go with a soy-based or a vegan protein powder or soy protein foods.
Angela, we just have a quick
Yep.
question. Actually, I think we have two. So
Yep.
Sharon asked, for female athletes, what should we be adding before, during, and especially after menstrual cycles?
Before, during, and after. Good. Yeah, it again very very individual. Really, before obviously focusing on hydration, even though they don't might not want to if they're feeling bloated. Maybe decreasing sodium and maybe a little bit of fiber that will help alleviate some bloating symptoms. Um, Really when we're looking at iron, so if they're really heavy, if they have really heavy menstrual cycles, sometimes we'll look at, again, implementing, and if they're in going to altitude, looking at implementing maybe an iron supplement during those times during training camps, and if they're going to be on the menstrual cycle. Yeah, it really is. Sometimes it's all about controlling their cravings too, and offering alternatives to maybe some of the sweet or the savory types of cravings that they may get. But usually, it's more in terms with find what they think is a water retention, but really in some of the research, what it's showing, it's not so much water retention as a water redistribution. So, but it's alleviating some of that bloating feeling and pressure, and sometimes just limiting the fiber and the sodium can help do that.
Thanks, Angela. The other question, we just had a coach ask if you could clarify what you were saying with whey and like being older than 18 versus younger than 18.
Oh, yeah, okay, sure. Um, Again, protein supplements, they're available everywhere, and I see lots of athletes, younger, adolescent, under 18, taking whey supplements or protein supplements in general. We don't advise anybody under the age of 18, just because we ethically don't have the research to support long-term use at age level. Once they kind of, I always get athletes, okay, I'm 18 now, can I have some whey protein, Angela? um, yeah, we just don't have enough research to support ethically what and risks associated with adolescent consumption of whey protein supplements. Not to mention, in any age group, you're looking at risk potential of doping. Usually, they're pretty safe with whey protein supplements, but nonetheless, it still is a risk because supplements aren't don't fall under Food and Drug, so they're not tested. Most of our supplements, actually, sorry, all of our supplements that we have at our sports center are tested. So we have them third party tested. But I would say a good alternative to if you have athletes that struggle with meaning protein and they do want a protein supplement. I did have one of the slides I posted. Skim milk powder would be a great alternative. 4 tablespoons get 9 grams of protein. So if they can include that in some of their baked goods, smoothies, whatever, cereals can be a great safe way of adding some extra protein.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. So moving along, I don't want to keep you too much over your time. I know we're getting close to snooze time here on the Atlantic coast. Um, so just staying healthy, some things that we kind of strategically look at before, again, entering in heavy training is how can we support that overall immune function that we know is can become suppressed in heavy training situations. So again, overall adequate matching of carbs, proteins, and energy. Making sure and I know it's hard with adolescent athletes because most of our antioxidant foods are fruits and veggies. Um, so making sure that they've got a good intake of those. It might even mean, yes, having a supplement of vitamin C or E, looking at adding some herbs and spices. Got some great antioxidant properties from some of our herbs and spices. So adding some turmeric, some cinnamon, garlic, all those great things to their diets. The other thing would be looking at maybe omega-3s, so their actual fatty fish consumption, and maybe implementing some probiotics. So foods in general, I alluded to this earlier, great that they're having natural fermented foods, whether it's kefir, yogurts, miso, kombucha, you name it. They're probably getting a good intake. However, if they're already immune suppressed, and their diets are limited, they could probably benefit from a probiotic. We haven't seen anything in all the research to date to indicate that there's any negative effects of having a probiotic, and in the amounts of like 30 to, even now they're saying 70 to 100 billion multi-strain cultures in a supplement. So if you've got somebody that's constantly getting sick, or obviously I would go to diet first, but it may help to have to implement a probiotic, a couple weeks out before travel or before competitions. If you've got anybody that's on antibiotics that already has gastrointestinal issues, again, maybe contact your sport dietitian and investigate opportunity to supplement with a probiotic. Other vitamins or minerals of concern, again, if we look at even vegan athletes, this is more pronounced, but even in just poor eaters or poor deficient energy deficient diets, vitamin D, we see B vitamins, iron specifically, and especially, again, the added demand of altitude training, maybe zinc, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium are all sort of at risk, I would say, vitamins or minerals within a vegan diet or a deficient diet. If we're looking at eliminating dairy, and sorry, this slide has that little box over top, but really it's just showing that if we looked at dairy compared to other alternative milk products, you're not getting the amount of the bioavailable calcium compared to dairy that you would even get in some of the fortified beverages. So I know the first go-to is always almond milk for a lot of athletes who aren't doing cow's milk or dairy, cow's dairy. But again, the next best option, if you were to see those numbers on that slide, actually would be soy. Is the best in terms of protein and calcium and phosphorus and vitamin D. Most of them are fortified. If they are fortified, it's not the vitamin D that's the issue. It's usually the quality of the calcium, the amount of the calcium, and obviously the protein. Again, a lot of people say, well, I can get it from foods too, but this slide just kind of shows that it takes a lot of almonds and a lot of extra calories to get the amount of calcium that you might get from almonds. Even though I'm a good promoter of almonds, but just not as an equivalent for calcium in terms of comparison to dairy. So I know I'm not sponsored by the dairy farmers. I'm just showing you the facts. But it is good to know, because a lot of athletes will say, well, I'm really not getting what I thought I was out of my almond milk or my almonds, if I thought I was getting an equivalent. So just to touch on iron a little bit more, we obviously know that females can especially struggle with low iron intakes based on, or depending on their menstrual cycles. So we're really looking at getting athletes, if we can, have their iron checked regularly. I'd love to see it 3 times a year. And I was just talking about this with one of my interns today, is we really do a poor job of getting some blood work and that's just, I know it's impractical with travel and with athletes, but we can do a better job of describing what athletes would need going into competitions and into training, if we knew better their patterns of nutrient deficiencies. So iron is one that can really take 3 to 6 months to come back to appropriate levels, depending on how deficient they are before So we do have an added need as we go to training at altitude, and male versus female. Again, if you're dealing with adults versus adolescents, and then if you've got even pregnant athletes, would have the highest amount of iron. Um, and vegans will tend to have a higher need as well. So you've got you can probably thinking in your head right now, I've got maybe a vegan pregnant female athlete trained at altitude would probably be your most iron demand on an athlete. But every province has different reference values for adequate levels of iron. So really right now in consensus with all the sport docs and dietitians across Canada, we're sort of targeting 60 milligrams or sorry, 60 as a minimum target for ferritin before training at altitude. So if they're not at that 60,
Angela, I think you know, but I think we just lost you. I heard you. If you're not at the 60, and I apologize, Coach is on the line. Sorry, we keep losing her. Hopefully she'll pop right back on. I know I was engaged in listening, so I hope to hear the last couple slides. And sorry we're going a little over, just for those of you guys that want the info. Angela, are you there? We can still see your screen, just no audio yet. Oh, and we saw your screen switch slides. So, Angela, can you hear me?
yes, I can.
There you are. You're back.
Okay, sorry. I'm sorry that's annoying. I'm not sure what's going on. Um, so yeah, so I was just saying that we basically, not to get too bogged down, but we actually have a higher minimum target for ferritin. So even though docs may say, yeah, ferritin looks good, it might not meet our higher requirement for athletes going to altitude. So some factors that affect it, again, we've already kind of talked about some of those, but we've got obviously increased losses as well, not just through menstruation, but if you're doing land training, foot strike, whether blood donors, and obviously in urine and if they're heavy sweaters. So lots of other dietary factors and demographic factors as well in there in those bubbles. But needless to say, there's lots of factors that affect iron status, and that's one area that we see pretty across the board in terms of athletes fluctuating between normally deficiencies, depends again, anemia, maybe not. We do see some symptoms of deficiency in those all listed there. So if you're, again, if any of those are ringing kind of true in some of your athletes, it might warrant a request to get some iron test done, some blood work done. Again, just looking at our overall targets, really they are higher for athletes. It isn't sort of a published thing, but we are sort of conclusively agreeing that this is where we'd like to see our athlete levels. High iron foods, kind of talked about those animal sources, those readily absorbable sources in terms of animal versus plant-based or non-heme sources. So definitely can get it, just may not be absorbed as well, especially if they're having phytic acids and coffee and tea in and around those heme or plant-based sources of iron, they may not be absorbing them to their efficiency. So looking at having those things like an hour before or after a plant-based iron meal, or including some vitamin C types of foods with it to enhance that absorption. So it gets pretty difficult when they're having like a nice high iron cereal for breakfast, maybe putting milk on it, obviously, so some calcium might bind it, and having their coffee with it. So at least have a glass of juice, and hopefully that'll negate the others. So as just mentioned, some tips for increasing the iron absorption there. If they're taking supplements, again, depending on what supplement they're is recommended, but depending on how deficient they are, that'd be something that the dietitian would look at with the doc. But basically taking it on an empty stomach with no other food. So I always say maybe right before bed is a good habit for some of them to get into. And then not looking at taking the other supplements because some of the metals may bind. I think I'm a little over, but that takes me right to the end. Not sure if you have any questions for me at this point. I'll gladly hang in there for a little bit if you have some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. If you guys have any questions, type them away. If you can get them down now, we'll do a couple group questions before I stop the recording. If not, I'll stop, and you guys can hang online for Angela if you just have a couple minutes in case there are any. While I wait, if anyone's typing, I just want to thank you, Angela. It was really good. I know, like myself, I got a lot out of it. And I was chatting with a couple of the coaches online. It sounds like everyone was very interested in it. And it's good, applicable, because we're just starting our competitive season. So this is really good timing, I know, for a lot of us on the call. Coaches on the call. So if you're on the call as well, admin side of things, you'll get your PD points. If I see everyone on here, so I should be able to capture all of your information. And just so that you know quickly, our next webinar is on the 25th of this month, so 2 Wednesdays from now, and it is about motivating your athletes and coaches. So feel free to get your athletes on that call as well, because that one is going to be really towards the athlete and the coach and motivating them throughout the season. So we have a couple questions coming in. So Kim asked, juices in the store, which ones are better? I can't remember if it's the blends we want to stay away from or ...
Yeah. I wish I could have a virtual grocery store right here online. So what you want to look for, some of the blends are actually not bad because some of them are actually still 100% fruit and veg blends. So just a couple of the brand names that pop into my head, Sunripe, Oasis, and they do make the little individual containers as well, which are great for travel. So really what you want to look for is 100%. Anything that really says like drink or punch, anything like that is usually probably added sugar, which again, we're dealing with athletes that have a higher carbohydrate demand. We don't want them to get all their extra required carbs from sugars. However, if they're not overdoing it, it's not a hugely detriment, but better quality, absolutely 100% fruit and veg.
Perfect. Thanks, Angela.
You're welcome.
And then I don't know if you can see these, but some people are thanking you. And then John said he enjoyed the few slides about the suggested servings around training statuses or Yes. And Kim says, perfect. John is a chef. There we go. There you go,
Ooh,
Angela.
I've
Yeah.
worked with lots of chefs in my day.
Yeah. So he said we do feed ski teams, and that means higher training regime that he can implement. Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Jen asked about sodium. She just said, what about sodium?
Yeah. So, and again, increase in fluid demands because of increased perspiration and fluid loss. So obviously with that comes electrolytes and sodium. depending on the individual. Sodium losses are, again, depending on their sweat rates and how the salty sweater they are. So I usually tend not to go much to some athlete parents' chagrin. Um, they don't need to focus on low sodium. In fact, they probably shouldn't focus on low sodium foods. Not to say they need to add salt shaker to everything, but they definitely don't have to avoid it. So again, that question about manipulating diets, training diets before and during periods and menstruation, that might be one area that I would look at maybe limiting, but or weight category sports. But other than that, yeah, no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't say we have to shy away from sodium with athletes at all, unless they have a other medical issue, right?
Perfect. Any other questions you guys have for Angela? And you guys now have her slides as well, so let me know if you weren't able to download them. And Jen says
Am I?
thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. And my information's on there. So if you don't have a local dietitian that you do work with, feel free to pop me an email. I'm usually pretty quick to get back if you've got a burning question or an athlete that you're wanting a little bit more information on condition. Just quick send me an email.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Angela. I'm going to stop the recording.